BushcraftOnFIre. Good afternoon, this is David Wendell with BushcraftOnFIre, and we're glad to have you with us for another video. I've got a lot of questions, actually a lot of questions, about different bow drill techniques and what you can do to make your job a little easier. And so I want to show you some tricks and techniques today. The bow drill is not really very hard. You only need 4 components: a hearth board, a drill, a bow, and some kind of a handhold to hold that drill. Now, let me show you a few little tips, a few little techniques that may help you if you're having struggles, some things to look for. I've done some videos on how to do the bow drill, but I've not shown you all the little techniques and tricks. So let me show you some things that may help you, some things to look for as you're working on your bow drill. Now, the first and all important component in your bow drill is your hearth board and your spindle. You want to get these from a soft hardwood, and a good test is if you can make an indentation with your fingernail. That would be a good test on the hardness. Usually I tend to get these out of the same material if possible, so cedar on cedar, willow on willow. There's all sorts of different things that will work. Test out different combinations and see what will work for you. But to learn the bow drill, I highly recommend that you buy a 1x4 piece of cedar from the store. You may have a hardware store or a wood store that sells cedar. This is a western cedar, I think, or eastern red cedar. Either one will work the same. And what you want to do is to take a 1x4 and split off about 1 inch of that, so you're left with a 2.5x4 or a 2.5x1, and your spindle will be the part that came out of here. Then you can just take your knife, you can carve your spindle out, okay, into a round shape, and you've got your basic components set up. Now, let's take a look first at the spindle. The first thing you notice is you want your spindle nice and straight. If you have a stick that you picked up out of the woods and it's doing all curves and stuff, you're never going to be able to spin that properly. So make sure that you have it pretty straight. The second thing that you want to do is to notice that there are 2 ends to this spindle. The top end that goes in the handhold is always the top. The bottom end that goes in the fireboard is always the bottom. Never exchange these 2 ends, because you want this part to be different from the top. First thing that I do is I take and I make the top relatively sharp. Depending on the handhold that I have, I want it pretty pointed, and that's going to give me the least amount of friction on top that I can have. On the bottom, I want it pretty well rounded, and I'm going to show you that again when we go to mate these boards in just a few minutes. A lot of people get concerned about the bow. The bow is easy. Just pick up any piece of wood about thumb diameter, about a 1/2 inch, and string a string on it. I use paracord. You can use natural string, you can use skins, you can use cordage from any source that you have. Shoelaces will work. But you notice that this string is pretty loose. Now, this is a bow that I've had since 1997. So this bow doesn't have any flexibility, and it's dry wood. This is actually a piece of cherry. But it doesn't matter what you make your bow out of. When I string my bow, let me unstring it for a minute for you and show you how I do this. There's a lot of ways to do this as well, and it doesn't matter as long as it's held in there. That's all that you really are concerned about. On the top, you'll notice that there's a Y up there. The Y works real well to put your top end in. The bottom, I put a hole through here with my awl on my knife. But you could just put a notch on there, that would work just as well. But you see that I've got the string relatively loose. I go back, I wrap the string around here on the outside, then on the inside of that string, and that holds it in place pretty firmly for me. I will say this, I've made thousands of Bowdrill fires with the same string, so you don't have to tear up your string if you do this properly. In order to go ahead and put your drill into your string, what you do is hold your drill on the inside of the string, push it to the outside holding the string so it curves over it, and then straighten it up. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You always want the rounded end pointing down into your fireboard. Now let's take a look at how to prepare the fireboard. When I prepare my fireboard, what I want to do is I want to measure the width of my drill. So if you're looking straight down the camera, you can see the edge of the drill comes right to the edge of fireboard, and that's about where I want to make my notch. So I go ahead and I just start a small hole in here. Now if you make it a little bit too far in, that's okay. If you make it too far out, that's a bad thing, because what will happen is your drill will tend to slip out of your notch. So just a small divot in there. Do that with my knife, I can do it with a rock, whatever I have at hand. Then I take the bottom end. Now I want this bottom end as flat as possible. Because I've just made a fire, it is gone and rounded off a little bit and reshaped. So what I'm going to do is just cut facets off of this until it's a little bit pointed. You need a point on there a little bit to hold that in to your divot you just made. Okay, and what we'll do then is to take that drill and mate that into the fireboard. Now the quickest way to mate it is just to go ahead, put it into your drill, or into your bow, put your handhold on top, and just spin it a few times. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this, and you will hear when this changes, possibly. There we go. We got some smoke. And what I've done, now I'm not using a lot of pressure on this either, just enough to go ahead and get that to the same shape as that drill. Now what I can do is to go ahead and cut that little point off of there, again flattening out that bottom. That makes this nice and flat for me, but it's mated into that fireboard. The next step that I'm going to do, which is preferable to me with a saw, I just use a little saw that is on my SAK, but some people do it with the knife as well, is I take and I make the notch. Now this notch is very important. You want the notch to run wide enough that the dust can come out, but not so wide that you can't hold the drill in there. For example, I don't have any that are too wide here, but if I were to break this end off, that notch wouldn't be any good. That would be too wide, and that could happen if you're not careful. So what I tend to do is to go right from the center of the hole out on an angle, and then just make a little bit of a saw cut. Now when I cut in about 1/4 of the way to 1/3 of the way into the notch. Now you notice that that's not straight up and down, that's on an angle. I'll go and do the same thing on the other side. And again, go about 1/4 to 1/3 of the way in. Then I can just break off that little piece of wood that's in there. Now again, you can do this with the knife. To me, a saw makes it a lot easier. You can see on the top, there's just enough space here. I think I want to go a little bit deeper with that. Just enough space in here for my dust to come out. But at the bottom, you'll notice that there is a widening. That widening allows the dust to come out and to conglomerate into a coal. That's a little trick that I learned. I didn't learn that from anybody. Just testing out over time, I found out that that notch that way works a lot better, so you might want to try that. Okay, so we've got our drill mated into the fireboard, and we've got our notch. We have one more piece that we need to use in order to put this whole thing together, and that's our handhold. So let me show you some things about a handhold.